Welcome to Johnny Carson Files. On this video, the stage manager knocks on Johnny Carson's dressing room door 40 minutes before airtime with a message that makes Johnny set down his coffee mid-sip. Andy Griffith is in the building, uninvited, unscheduled, and he is asking for exactly 6 minutes at the end of the show. What Andy Griffith is about to reveal about his oldest friend, a man everyone in America knew as the nervous deputy from Mayberry, would leave Johnny Carson unable to speak on live television. But before we dive in, quick reminder: double-check that you're subscribed, since a lot of you think you already are and aren't. It's free, and it really helps the channel. Thank you for being here. The Tonight Show was recorded that afternoon in early 1983, before a studio audience of roughly 300 people at NBC's Burbank studios. The broadcast set to air to nearly 20 million Americans later that night. Nobody in the building had any idea what was coming. Fred de Cordova, the show's longtime producer, had run the lineup past Johnny twice that morning. A senator, an actress promoting a new film, a comedian nobody had heard of yet. Andy Griffith's name was nowhere on it. So when Andy Griffith walked through the security entrance at NBC Burbank at 3:50 in the afternoon, wearing a plain brown sport coat and asking, quietly, for 5 minutes with Mr. Carson before the taping began, the guard at the desk did not know what to do with himself. He had grown up watching Sheriff Andy Taylor solve problems with nothing but patience and a slow smile. And here was that same man standing in front of him, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. Word reached Johnny's dressing room by 3:55. Johnny opened the door himself. He took one look at Andy Griffith's face and stepped back without a word, the same way he always did when he understood, instantly, that something serious had walked into the room. They spoke for 11 minutes behind that closed door. The stage manager knocked once and was told, quietly, to give them a few more minutes. When Andy emerged, his eyes were red-rimmed. Johnny's hands, normally so steady before a broadcast, would not stop moving as he reviewed his note cards one final time. Wait, do not miss this detail, because what Andy Griffith had told Johnny Carson behind that door would not become public until the very last 6 minutes of that night's broadcast. And even then, only Johnny and Andy understood the full weight of it. The show began at 5:30 that afternoon, exactly on schedule. Johnny's monologue carried its usual rhythm, but Ed McMahon, seated to his left for the 14th year running, could tell something was different. Johnny's eyes kept drifting toward the wings between jokes. During the first commercial break, Ed leaned in. "You all right, Johnny?" In about 40 minutes, "Ed, something is going to happen on this stage that has never happened before," Johnny said quietly. "I need you to just let it happen. Don't cut away. Don't fill the silence. Just let it be what it is." Ed did not ask why. He had learned, over 14 years, that when Johnny used that particular tone, the only right answer was trust. The scheduled guests came and went. A senator discussed the economy. An actress promoted her new film with practiced charm. The audience laughed in all the expected places. But backstage, in a small dressing room 3 doors down from Johnny's own, Andy Griffith sat beside a wheelchair, holding the hand of a smaller man wrapped in a gray cardigan sweater, a man whose face America had loved for 2 decades, but whose body had grown thin and tired in ways the show's writers had quietly agreed never to mention on air. What you have seen so far is nothing compared to what happened next, because at 6:41 that evening, with 11 minutes left in the broadcast, Johnny Carson looked directly into camera 1 and said something that was not on any cue card. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do something we don't normally do on this show. About an hour ago, an old friend of mine walked into this building and asked if he could share something with all of you tonight. I want you to meet him properly." The band did not play an introduction. There was no fanfare, no music sting, nothing but Andy Griffith walking out from the wings alone, wearing that same plain brown sport coat, his hands empty, his expression unlike anything audiences had seen from him before, warm, but visibly, openly breaking. The studio audience rose to their feet, uncertain whether to applaud or simply watch. Andy Griffith did not sit down. He walked to the center of the stage, closer to the audience than any guest usually stood, and he looked directly into the camera, the way a man looks at someone he loves when he does not know how many more chances he will get to say something true. "Some of you know me as Andy Taylor," he began, his voice steady but thick. The sheriff who never had to raise his voice, never had to draw his gun, because he had the best deputy a man could ask for standing right beside him. That deputy's name, in real life, is Don Knotts. He paused. The studio was completely silent. "And Don asked me not to do this," Andy said. "He told me 2 days ago, sitting in his living room, that he did not want anybody making a fuss over him. That is exactly the kind of man Don Knotts is, and it is exactly why I am standing here anyway, because some things are too important to leave unsaid, just because a friend is too humble to want them said." Andy Griffith reached into the inside pocket of his sport coat and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases from being carried and unfolded many times. "Don's doctors gave him some news 3 weeks ago," Andy said. "I am not going to stand up here and use the word nobody wants to hear, because that is Don's to say if he ever wants to say it, and only Don's. But I will tell you this. The doctors gave him a window, and that window is measured in months now, not years." The audience gasped as one sound, rippling backward through all 300 seats. Ed McMahon had risen halfway from his chair. Johnny Carson sat perfectly still at his desk, his jaw tight, his eyes already glistening. "And when I found out," Andy continued, his voice cracking for the first time, "I thought about the day I met Don Knotts, 1959, off Broadway. Both of us broke, both of us convinced we would never work again. Don didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and neither did I, and somehow that man made me laugh so hard on our worst days that I forgot to be scared about the future. 23 years we made people laugh together. 23 years, and not once, not one single time, did that man complain about anything that was actually hurting him." He paused, unfolding the small piece of paper in his hands. "This morning he wrote something down and told me I could read it tonight if I thought it was the right moment. And I think it is the right moment." Johnny Carson leaned forward at his desk, unable to look away. Andy Griffith read from the paper, his voice unsteady. "To whoever is out there feeling invisible, feeling like the world only sees the funny version of you and never asks how you are really doing, I see you. I spent my whole life making people laugh so they would not notice I was scared underneath it too. It is all right to be scared. It is all right to let somebody carry it with you." Andy Griffith folded the paper carefully and looked up. And then, before Johnny Carson or Ed McMahon or anyone in that studio fully understood what was happening, a wheelchair was pushed out from the wings by a member of the crew, and sitting in it, wrapped in the same gray cardigan, was Don Knotts himself, smaller than America remembered him, his hands trembling slightly in his lap, but his eyes, when they found the camera, still carrying that same nervous, warm, unmistakable spark. The studio erupted, not into applause exactly, but into something rawer. 300 people rising fully to their feet, many of them openly crying, because the deputy had come home one more time. Johnny Carson stood up from behind his desk, something he almost never did mid-broadcast, and walked around to meet them both at the center of the stage. He knelt slightly beside the wheelchair and took Don Knotts' hand in both of his own. "Don," Johnny said, his voice breaking completely now, Thank you for spending 20 years making this country laugh right along with the rest of us." Don Knotts looked up at Johnny, and that famous nervous smile spread slowly across his face. The same smile that had made an entire nation feel less alone on 1,000 different nights. "Johnny," Don said quietly, his voice thin but clear enough for the microphones to catch every word. "I always figured if I had one more thing to say on television, I'd want it to be thank you. So there it is. Thank you." The studio held its breath. Andy Griffith knelt on Don's other side, one hand resting gently on his old friend's shoulder, and for a long moment none of the three men said anything at all, because nothing needed to be added. 20 million people, Johnny said finally, turning to face the camera, his cheeks wet. That is how many people are going to see this tonight, and every single one of them grew up laughing because of this man right here. Nobody in television history has given more people more joy while asking for less credit than Don Knotts. He looked back down at Don. "We see you, Don. We always saw you." The Tonight Show ran 11 minutes over its scheduled time that evening, and NBC received no complaints. The switchboard was overwhelmed before the broadcast had even finished airing on the East Coast. Letters and telegrams arrived for weeks, from veterans, from nurses, from people who had spent their own quiet years hiding their fear behind a smile, all of them saying some version of the same thing, that watching Don Knotts say thank you had given them permission to stop pretending everything was fine. Don Knotts lived for 2 more years after that broadcast, longer than the doctors had first suggested, and Andy Griffith visited him every single week, without exception, until the end. When Don Knotts passed away in February of 2006, Andy Griffith was at his bedside, and in the years that followed, whenever anyone asked Andy about his career, about Mayberry, about the awards and the decades of television history, he gave the same answer every time. "The proudest thing I ever did on television," Andy said, "was walk out on Johnny Carson's stage uninvited and make sure the whole country knew what I already knew, that my best friend was the bravest man I ever met because he spent his whole life letting the world laugh instead of asking them to worry." If this story moved you, think about the people in your own life who make you laugh and never once ask for anything in return, the ones who might be carrying something heavier than they let on. Subscribe so you never miss these stories. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight, and if you have a friend like Don Knotts, someone who gives without asking, tell us about them. Let's remember them here together. Disclaimer: this story is a work of narrative fiction created for entertainment purposes. While inspired by real public figures and historical settings, all events, dialogue, and interactions are imagined and do not depict real interviews or documented occurrences. Any resemblance to actual events or private conversations is purely fictional.